So we want to send our meetup data to a server. This course is about React, about the front end. And therefore here, we will not write any server-side code or create our own backend. I do have separate tutorials on that. Got my Node.js course where you learn all about that backend technology, including how to connect to databases, how to create REST APIs, and much more. And I got a free tutorial as well where we also build a REST API in detail with Node.js step by step. Because with React, or with single-page applications in general, you typically need a backend API to which you can send your requests. So a backend which does not send back HTML, but which instead expects data in a certain format, typically JSON format, and which then returns data in that JSON format, and which simply exposes a couple of URLs to which you can send requests, and depending on which URL you're sending a request to, different things will happen. That's the kind of backend you typically connect to with React. Now, you don't connect a front-end application like React or Angular to a database itself. I got a full tutorial on that where I explain why we don't want to do that. You'll also find a link to that attached. You don't connect directly to a database with React and so on because of security. All the code you write here in your React application in the end is exposed to the visitors of your page. Through the DevTools, if I look at sources, if I dig into that, I can read the JavaScript code that makes up your application. It might look a bit different than when we wrote it, but all the code is in there. And database credentials would be in there as well. That's why instead we need a backend API, a backend server, to which we can send requests. And then it's that server which on the server connects to a database and stores data in a database. And hence that's what we're going to do here. Now, as I mentioned though, we're not going to write our own API, instead we're going to use Firebase as a dummy backend here. Firebase is a service offered by Google. It is actually made up of a bunch of different services, but it is a service which you can get started with for free. You just need a Google account. And it is a service which contains a database and an API to which we can send requests, which will then ensure that data is saved in that database. And for this, I'll therefore log in here with my Google account. And then once logged in, we can create a new project here. You can enter any project name you want here. I'll just name it React Getting-Started. Click Continue. You can disable Google Analytics, we don't need that, and create that project. Now, as I said, Firebase is a service which has a bunch of built-in capabilities. Here, we'll just use it in a very basic way to have this dummy backend to talk to. And I'm using this backend, this service, because that allows me to show you how you send requests to a backend, and you would then do that in the same way no matter which backend you use in the end. That's why that's a good service to use. Now here we want to use the real-time database, which is one of the features Firebase offers, and then there click on Create Database. Now you can leave the default region and make sure that you start in test mode, not in locked mode. Otherwise you'll not be able to send requests. Now this sets up a database and, very important, also immediately an API to which we can send requests. We can use this URL here to send requests to, and behind the scenes on Firebase servers, those requests will then be parsed, and depending on which kind of request we send, data attached to the request will be extracted and stored in the database automatically. And therefore it can look like if we're directly sending requests to a database, but we're actually sending requests to that Firebase API, which then behind the scenes stores them in a database. And therefore, that's the URL to which we now want to send a request when we submit that form. Now it's up to us where we want to send that request. If that's in the Meetup form component, or maybe in the new Meetup page component. And since the new meetup form component is already quite a big file, I will actually not add the HTTP code here, but instead in the new meetup component code. So in the new meetup form component, I just want to forward that meetup data to the parent component, to the component where we use this component. And we learned that we can do that with props. We can accept props here in the new meetup form. And then instead of console logging the meetup data, we can expect that on props, we have some prop which actually gets a function as a value. A function which we can then call from inside here. Let's say the onAddMeetup prop. The name is up to you because that's our component. I expect that the value on this prop is a function, so we can execute it here, and I'll pass meetup data as an argument. Now, of course, for this to work, we now need to make sure that in the new meetup component, we now add this onAddMeetup prop, and that the value we pass in here is a function. So here I'll add a new function, the addMeetupHandler function, which expects to get some meetup data, because I'm passing that argument here when I call the function from inside the new meetup form component. So I expect that data here. And I then pass this addMeetupHandler function as a value to onAddMeetup. Like this, without parentheses, just pointing at it. Now in this function, that's where I want to send a HTTP request.